All the way from the start, I can feel it in my heart, like all the way from the start.
Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today I have a new tutorial where we're going to do a direct comparison of the stock plugins in Logic Pro X compared to some third-party plugins, some of them fairly expensive plugins, but this is a really popular question on the channel from those of you who are curious, do I really need third-party plugins? What are the strong points of some of the stock plugins in Logic Pro X? And what are some of the weak points? So what are the first third-party plugins that you should invest in after you've gotten used to the stock plugins? But first, let's just take a listen. I actually have set up this verse in sections, and the first section is mixed entirely with stock Logic Pro X plugins. And then the second is mixed with third-party plugins from companies like Waves, Fabfilter. I think it's just those two. And then we've got also some third-party reverb. I have the Seventh Heaven from Liquid Sonics and the Echo Boy on the delay. And then obviously in Logic, I have corresponding stock plugins, and the settings are very, very close. I tried to make sure things like the compression ratios are very, very similar across the board in terms of thresholds, ratios, all that stuff. So let's go ahead and play it back again. The first section of the verse are stock Logic Pro X plugins. The second half are third-party plugins.
Rise, fresh about the scene, looking clean in this bitch. They gon' need a team, catch all the scenes in one miss. My opportunities, dreams accomplished, the shit with no assist. Through late nights and politicking, vision boards and goal getting, battled all my life through all that bullshit and drama. Freaking support from my family, all the deep talks with my mama. Niggas dying so easy, cops shooting black bag on TV. Not many options to choose, you lose, can't fall victim to systems, bitch. I got one move, I got one move left, I run.
All right, so let's do it one more time, and I'm going to solo our vocals here so that you can keep an eye on the analyzer over here and the frequency. You're going to see that they're very, very similar, but this will give you just a better idea specifically of some differences in the sound.
Fresh about the scene, looking clean in this bitch. They gon' need a team, catch all the scenes in one miss. My opportunities, dreams accomplished, the shit with no assist. Through late nights and politicking, vision boards and goal getting, battled all my life through all that bullshit and drama. Freaking support from my family, all the deep talks with my mama. Niggas dying so easy, cops shooting black bag on TV. Not many options to choose, you lose, can't fall victim to systems, bitch. I got.
All right, so that gives you a good idea of just the different sounds there. They're not that dramatically different. There are some subtleties in the different chains, and I want to talk now about each of the individual corresponding plugins that I use for the stock plugins and then the third-party plugins, and kind of which ones are a little more the weaker links in terms of the stock plugins. So got a noise gate on both the stock as well as the third-party. And a noise gate, you really don't need a third-party noise gate. This noise gate in Logic Pro X is a wonderful utility plugin. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, which is just attenuate that noise floor. And you don't need a third-party noise gate. In my personal opinion, it's not going to change a whole lot. Now, getting into our Deductive EQ, let me pull up the Deductive EQ over here on the third party, which is the Pro Q, and then I'm using this stock Logic Pro X channel EQ. Now you see I've cut them at the same points, and to be honest with you, for doing Deductive EQ, I think the channel EQ in Logic Pro X is perfectly fine. You really get more into the differences of EQ when you start adding. So you're going to have different colors, and the curves are really going to affect the sound a lot more. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But as far as just cutting things, the Logic stock EQ is wonderful. I don't have any qualms with it. Now let's go on to the compression, which is obviously a very, very important part of the vocal, or any vocal, especially with your hip hop vocals. So let's talk about the stock Logic Pro X compressor versus some of the others like the Pro C, Pro C2, the Waves R Comp, some of those other popular third-party compressors. I will say that, in my opinion, the stock Logic Pro X compressor is one of the biggest assets of the stock plugins that are included in Logic Pro. It has a lot of these different flavors up here, so you can select different kinds of compressors just by flicking the switch, and it will maintain your ratio, your threshold settings. So you can go through and get some different colors, which is really important with compression. You want to experiment with different styles because these are all going to affect the sound differently. But in my experience, the stock compressor in Logic Pro X is really great. This is not what I would upgrade first. This is going to do you just fine for a while you're learning how to use compression and mix. And it's also really handy just with the way that you can use sidechaining routing within Logic Pro X. So now moving on to the additive EQ in the chain, which you're going to see up here, I'm boosting pretty high on the channel EQ. And what I've done is I've just replicated what I had done on the SSL. And generally with this EQ, I just like to kind of boost the air or the extreme highs. So I have this set at like 14K, and then I'm boosting pretty heavily. So I've done really the same kind of thing over here with the channel EQ. And then I've just done some of the roll off and the filtering once again, just to get rid of even more lows and low mids. So this is the first, or one of the first things that if you're going to move towards third-party plugins, the additive EQs are really important. And ones like this, the SSL, they just have a certain color to them, and they have a certain curve to the frequency boost that just sounds really musical. It fits well in the mix, as opposed to the channel EQ. It's not that it won't do the job, but it's just a little bit harsher, and it's a bit tougher to be really precise and make musical types of boosts without having to get in and be, extremely surgical with how you're, creating these boosts. So just something to be aware of, but I would highly recommend investing in an additive EQ as one of your first third-party plugins once you get to that point. Ones like the SSL EQ, the Pro Q2 for boosting your frequencies, especially high-end, is going to be really helpful for you and very musical. All right, next up we got the Deesser, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is the first plugin, if you're using Logic Pro X, that I would invest in third party, because the Deesser in Logic Pro X, it's not very user friendly. You can get a decent kind of tone out of it, but it takes a lot of work. And as you heard, I personally don't think that it sounds nearly as smooth, and it's not doing the same job as the Waves Deesser. So you can generally get this Waves Deesser for a really affordable price, and it's totally worth it, especially if you're using these digital, maybe a USB mic, or you don't have a preamp, you're just running through, a really kind of harsh sort of signal chain. Then this Deesser is going to take care of that sibilance that you really want to tame with your vocals, especially in hip hop, so that it's just, that is one of the most annoying things in a vocal, is having too much sibilance. So definitely check out third-party Deesser like that, or also the Fabfilter Pro DS is a good one. I'm also using this Manny Marroquin Triple D, which again is just great for those of you who are recording with a very digital kind of clean signal chain. This is going to warm things up a little bit, de-harsh it. Let's get to the last thing in our chain, which is just a limiter. And all I'm doing with this is just preventing us from going above 0. If you're using a limiter just in this way on your actual bus, I think the stock limiter does just fine. Now, if we start talking about master limiters, then I think the Logic Pro X stock plugins are really limited, no pun intended, in that way, because I believe it is the adaptive limiter, or even the multi-press, or just the limiter. If you're using this for mastering, it's just not going to be as transparent as something like Ozone, or even the Fabfilter Pro L. The Waves L2 is even going to give you a cleaner sound. So I would recommend one of those before running your mix through one of those processors in Logic Pro X, because it is going to affect your transients in a not so pleasant way. So last, let's get to just our send effects or some of the auxes that I have set up here. I've got the Space Designer for the Reverb in Logic Pro X, which honestly, it's a great reverb. I really don't think that you need to venture too far out from that for a while. I do like this Seventh Heaven and some of the other third-party reverbs. The Lexicon is a really nice reverb, but again, I wouldn't get ahead of yourself. I would start off with the Space Delay, and even some of the other Logic reverb plugins like Platinum Verb are, they're generally pretty nice tones to them. So that's not really a troublesome area, at least when you're starting out. And then going to our delay, I have the third-party plugin as Echo Boy, which is a really strong echo and delay processor. In my opinion, it's probably the best out there. It's tough to beat, but if you're just doing like basic, delay throws and maybe subtle delays, like in the verse, like in this one, we just have a 16th note delay that's just giving us a little bit of a stereo effect. So for stuff like that, again, this is going to do you just fine, the tape delay in Logic Pro X. Let's just talk about metering really quickly. We, we're able to look at these meters as we were checking out these verse vocal chains. And I have the waves. I have some other metering. I use the I use the Ozone metering sometimes. I have one from Plugin Alliance called BX Meter that I use sometimes. And to be honest, they all really tell you the same thing. Like this one's measuring RMS right now and peak. This one's doing peak and RMS, and they generally are going to give you really close readings to each other. This is the same thing, peak, RMS. It's more about what you're kind of used to looking at and what's going to be the easiest for you to reference during your mix. So if you just glance at one of these, you can really get a quick idea of what is going on. So more than anything else in terms of features, they really do the same thing. It's just what is your personal preference. So just keep that in mind. But for at least when you're starting out, again, the stock metering in Logic is going to be just fine for you. All right, y'all. So we talked about the stock Logic Pro X plugins specifically for mixing and compared them with the third-party plugins, a couple from Waves, Fabfilter. We've got some stuff in there from Soundtoys, some really nice third-party plugins. They're going to be more expensive. And my advice to you would be get really comfortable with the stock Logic Pro X plugins. And then some of the first ones that you're going to want to check out once you do get comfortable with those would be a Additive EQ, something that's going to give you some nice clean boosts, give you a professional top end. And then I would look into the Deesser because that, again, is a gaping hole in some of Logic Pro X's plugin chains. And finally, you want to invest in a good master limiter or brick wall limiter so that when you're doing your mixes and you want to bring things out at commercial levels and you just want to keep things in check, not peaking on your master bus, you're going to want something like this that's not going to drastically affect your transients and it's going to keep your dynamics in check. So definitely check out something like Ozone or even the L2, the L1 in some cases is okay from Waves as well. So a lot of good options out there that are going to serve you better than the Logic Pro X master limiters. Hope the video was helpful for you. If you have any questions about the stock Logic Pro X plugins or third-party plugins that we compared here, feel free to leave a comment below. If you learned anything in the video, please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.